July 1953, the Chinese would attack Pork Chop Hill a second time. Why? Because the first time was obviously so much of a blast. Why not do that shit again? But this time they would go bigger and harder.
That's what she said.
I know. Real quick though, we're just gonna hit the wave tops again so you guys have your bearings, you guys know where we're at. June 1950, North Korea pushes over the border, invades South Korea. They push them all the way down to the Pusan perimeter, and then UN. Ugh.
What a fucking idiot.
Then U.S. and UN forces would push the North Koreans all the way back up to the Yalu River, almost entirely destroying the country, and then China would pour over the border, pushing back down to the 38th parallel, and then they would just kind of stalemate. During the stalemate, many battles would be fought over the hills of the UN defensive line, to include the first Battle of Pork Chop Hill, which takes place in April 1953. And if you want to go see that video, you can go check that out over on my channel. After the April battle, the U.S. would push the Chinese off the hill, secure it, and then the 7th Infantry Division would spend time reinforcing and rebuilding the defenses on Pork Chop Hill in preparation for follow-on attacks, just like the story that we're going to talk about today. On the night of July 6th, the Alpha Company would hold Pork Chop Hill, and they would get hit by a massive Chinese attack that would outnumber the Americans almost 5-1. The Chinese would attempt to push through 1st and 2nd platoons, surrounding them and cutting them off from each other, and then go and assault the main U.S. command post. And they would come pretty heavy. They came with flamethrowers, bazookas, automatic weapons. They really wanted this hill. And for some reason, some of them would even bring sulfur sticks, because I guess they thought the fumes would push the Americans out of the bunkers. I don't know. I mean, I think I would probably just suck up the smell of rotten eggs. Just me, though. After the Chinese pushed up, Lieutenant Wilcox from 2nd Platoon would take off to the command post, try to defend it, but he would get heavily engaged with the Chinese and use not only his .32, but also his .45 caliber pistol to kill at least a dozen Chinese. And then some other Chinese dude, thinking that he was going to be the one to take out Lieutenant Wilcox, runs up on him and charges him. At that point, Lieutenant Wilcox proceeds to take out one of his 3 knives and kill this dude. Clearly, Lieutenant Wilcox understood the assignment, because this dude was ready to go. He had all of the things. Yo, bro, come on. Like, don't you think that's a little overkill? You got your rifle, 45, 32, and you got 3 knives with you, bro? Come on, dude. That's a lot. Nah. Eventually, Lieutenant Wilcox would reach the Alpha Company CP, and he would just, even though he was wounded in the back, he would put himself at the point of friction like a good leader, which in this case was the main entrance to the bunker, and he would just start throwing hand grenades out at the attacking Chinese. This dude was just yeeting and deleting commies like it was no one's business. Eventually, he would get wounded again, this time in the leg, and he'd have to get dragged back into the bunker while the rest of his soldiers barricaded the door. But not being one to quit, he would still help his soldiers fight and continue to hold off enemy counterattacks for more than 2 days. The initial Chinese assault would eventually end up with Alpha Company being surrounded and needing reinforcements. And this would come in the form of not only B Company, but also E Company as well. So obviously someone at the top took a class on why you need to send more than 1 company of grunts to fight off an invading force that already took out 1 company of grunts. Hey, learning has occurred, alright? The Americans would bombard the top of the hill with proximity fuse shells, which were basically airburst shells. So what they did was they would come in and they would explode in the air, not on the ground, so this way causing a larger dome, a wider range to deal death upon the enemy. The Americans would also begin bombarding the slopes of the hill, thus disabling the Chinese from getting any further reinforcements up there, and then just keeping it whatever Chinese were up there and whatever Americans were up there until the Americans lifted their bombardment and the reinforcements would come up for the American side. While the Americans bombarded the slopes of Pork Chop Hill with artillery fire, B Company would be sent up around midnight 30 on July 7th, and their initial push unfortunately didn't really go that well, and they would get pushed back down to a supply bunker to resupply before continuing their assault. However, unfortunately, during their resupply, their company commander would be killed by an enemy sniper. Around 04, B Company would link up with A Company, and they would collectively work together to retake about 9 Chinese bunkers. At this point, E Company, who had been held in reserve at the bottom of the hill, they would have their 1st platoon push up the hill and start evacuating the casualties. Once all the casualties were off the hill, the rest of E Company would go up there and reinforce to join the American effort to retake the hill. Later in the morning on the 7th, Lieutenant Shea, the A Company commander, would rally his men and push back, taking more of the trench line, giving the Americans a better vantage point over the battlefield. And roughly around noon, an E Company platoon would push forward and take the central part of the hill, regaining multiple other bunkers that the Americans had lost to the Chinese. Around this same time, noon on the 7th, Lieutenant General Trudeau, the commanding general for the 7th Infantry Division, would make a personal visit to the hill, and he would inspect and deem that if they just allocated more bullets, the Americans could hold the hill.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Which, I mean, I guess, kind of, but if you don't have enough shooters, the sheer volume of ammo you have in storage back there, it really doesn't matter. If you don't have enough shooters to take out the Chinese, you're not really going to go anywhere. So you kind of need both in sufficient quantities, which right now they don't really have. Now, the Americans on the hill would attempt a counterattack later that night. However, the Chinese had the same idea and would attack nearby Hill 200 and the evacuation landing zone on Port Chop Hill, which is where all the Americans were getting, like the American casualties, they're all getting lined up, ready to get taken out for the next aid station. During the Chinese counterattack, they would reinforce all the positions that they had already taken on the hill, and F Company of the 32nd Infantry would be sent to reinforce and counterattack against the Chinese. And originally they were sent to go all the way around and flank from behind, but then at the last minute they got their orders changed and they were to go up and over the crest of the hill. Unfortunately, F Company's sweep over the crest of the hill really didn't go that well, and they really weren't able to push the Chinese off because an entire another battalion of Chinese had come up the hill and reinforced these positions. So they were then ordered to go push to the evacuation landing zone and try to stop the Chinese attack there, but they would come under some serious enemy artillery fire, with the Chinese roughly expending 5 artillery shells per second. However, American grit and determination would prevail, and F Company would foil the Chinese plan to take the evacuation landing zone, this enabling the Americans to get all of their dead and wounded off of the hill. Now at this point, the Americans, unwilling to give up the hill, would realize that one company at a time would not be enough to retake this hill.
Great observation there, Gary.
So they would draw up plans for 2 companies to attack simultaneously to try and retake this hill.
I'll show them.
On July 8th, the 2 companies would get into position, and just like the fighting in World War I, dudes would go over the top of the trenches and just immediately start getting cut down. And by around 1800 that night, they had suffered around 50% casualties for the assault of the 2 companies. Now, Lieutenant Shea at this point would realize that the 2 platoons, 1st and 2nd, who had been cut off, like I said earlier in the video, they'd been cut off by the Chinese. They really wouldn't be able to push free without significant pressure being pulled off of them. So he would rally his men and conduct several successful counterattacks against the Chinese that would relieve enough pressure off those 2 platoons that they could push free and get themselves out of it. On the morning of July 9th, Lieutenant Shea would try this again, but that counterattack didn't go as well. The Chinese at this point, they knew what he was doing, and they were able to anticipate and stall his attack. So now at this point in the battle, it would kind of become a stalemate, with the 7th Infantry Division launching counterattacks with different companies, and the Chinese doing the same thing. And even at one point, Lieutenant General Trudeau even tried to take back Old Baldy, which was a hill just adjacent to Port Chop Hill, to just pull some pressure off of the hill and allow the Americans to retake it. But even that plan just kind of got thrown out because, I mean, he only really had one company to commit to that, and like we just talked about, one company is not going to be enough. By the evening of July 10th, all the American wounded and dead would be evacuated off of the hill, and at this point, a decision really needed to be made whether we were going to keep fighting for this hill or we were just going to be like, screw it and just be done with it.
Sir, we need leadership.
By now, the second battle for Port Chop Hill had been going on for well over 120 plus continuous hours. Both sides were dramatically exhausted, and the Chinese had already committed an entire division to taking this hill, which, if you think about it, that's a pretty good testament to the American soldier, because we didn't commit nearly that many troops, and at no point did we really hold any less than 50% of the hill. Now, General Trudeau would meet with Lieutenant General Maxwell Taylor, the commanding general for the U.S. 7th Army, and him and the other American leaders would collectively decide that with the armistice being almost signed and Port Chop Hill At the end of this war, it would fall in the middle of the DMZ, so no one would hold it anyways. Enough blood had already been shed, and they weren't going to shed anymore. So they decided that they would pull all the American forces off of the hill. But there was a little bit of a caveat to how they were going to do it. The Americans had one more trick up their sleeve. They would pull in tanks and other armored personnel carriers to make the Chinese think that they were going to actually do another assault on the hill. But this was really just to buy time so they could set booby traps and evacuate all the remaining American personnel. The Army engineers would spend time setting up booby traps all over the hill so that when the Chinese did eventually walk up the hill thinking, hey, finally took the hill, they would just get turned to pink mist by the American booby traps. And then after pulling off the hill, the Americans and other UN forces would use basically all of the artillery and all of the aircraft they had in the area to drop a massive bombardment on top of this hill, killing even more Chinese. Oh, and if that's not enough, the engineers would set a massive explosive network through all the bunkers and trench lines. After the aerial bombardment, they would blow that thing, basically turning all of the bunkers and all of the trench line into complete dust and a useless position for the Chinese to now hold. So,
Ouch.
the US Army would pull all forces off the hill without losing a single man in the withdrawal. And at the end of this 5-day battle, the Americans would walk away with roughly around 1,200 casualties, which is very tragic. However, that was dead and wounded, and dead and wounded for the Chinese was almost 5,500.
God damn.
Pretty remarkable how good the American soldier really is. Thank you to everybody for watching today's video. I really appreciate it. If you like it, please leave a like or a comment. It really helps the channel grow, so this way we can get a lot of these untold stories out there for everyone to hear. And if you'd like to see more of my content in the future, please hit that red subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next one.